Hey y'all, it's Miss Welch. This video will be about tissues, specifically epithelial tissues. So we're going to look at that general classification of tissues, both in terms of its structural characteristics and its functions. And then we're going to break it down into specific epithelial tissue types, looking at their structure, their function, and common locations in the human body. There are four classes of tissues, and so we're going to talk in this video about epithelials. So let's just start by thinking about the general functions of most epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues primarily protect and cover our organs, our cavities, etc. So probably the number one example everyone thinks of is your epidermis, right? Your skin. So that's a solid covering to protect you. Thinking in other places, we have linings for all the tubes that come into and out of our body. So think about the respiratory tract, the digestive tract. Epithelials line those tubes from the beginning all the way to the very end as a protection against things coming in. Whether it's from the inside of that tube or the outside on our skin, epithelials are protective of that internal environment of our body. Because they're on the outside of all the cavities and outside skin, epithelials can also be very absorbent, right? They can absorb things like in your digestive tract. They can also secrete things like sweat or oil, right? So you can have glands embedded in epithelial tissue that secrete or absorb. They also line hollow organs. So think about your heart, your lungs, your stomach, anything that has an inside hollow space, the epithelials will line that, and it also will have a lining of epithelials on the outside of the organ. So we've got epithelials everywhere. Now, if we're thinking about their functions as protection, covering, absorption, secretion, then we can think about their structure along those same lines. Epithelial tissues are primarily very cellular. So you'll see other tissue types in here, particularly connective tissue, will have lots of fibers and proteins embedded. You're not going to find that in epithelials. It's going to be a solid sheet of cells. Every cell is going to touch the next one because we're trying to make a barrier, right? You don't want gaps or holes. So your epithelial tissues are going to be very cellular. You're going to see, when you look at a picture of one, you're going to see a cell with a nucleus all over the place, all touching each other. They're also very avascular. There's not a lot of blood vessels going to those tissues. They have to be nourished by other tissues below or around them that have the blood vessels embedded. Another good fact is that they are typically polarized. So because they are lining, there's going to be a top and a bottom. You're going to have an outer edge that is either, next to other organs in the body, other cavities, or the skin. And then the other side then is going to be attached to basement membranes and then later into other types of tissue layers. So you're going to see a polar difference, usually a free edge. A lot of times on microscopes, that just shows up as white space where we cut a tissue sample. And then you're going to have a basement membrane side that has other tissues on the other edge. And so also, if you could see inside the cells themselves, sometimes you'll see a polarized effect of the organelles and structures in the cell itself. For example, you might have a gland, right, that is attached on one end and then secreting outward. So you're going to see a difference in the top and bottom of the cell layer. And that's another good clue. It's epithelial when you see that difference. Start talking about specific types of epithelial tissues. A lot of times we can classify them both by their shape and by their number of layers. So if you look at this first row here by shape, so the rows are shape in this picture. Squamous, this is a kind of squashed shape or a flat shape. It's usually very thin cells. Sometimes people say they look like fried eggs. If you're looking at the top of them, top down, they say it looks like a fried egg, or pavers, like a road or something, a sidewalk put together. And those are called squamous cells by their shape. Cuboidal we don't have perfect squares in the body. We're not like a plant cell where they have that strict cell wall that make them look real rectangular. But a cuboidal cell is roughly a cube. It's one of those rounded off type cubes, like a pillow cube, right? It's not perfectly square, sharp edges, but it looks like a cube in that it's basically the same height and width. So you can have cuboidal cells, and then columnar are like they sound. They're a column. They're the rectangular cells. They look, again, not perfectly sharp edges rectangle, but they look taller than they are wide. So they look like a tall, skinny column. So there's three basic main shapes for epithelials. Then you can talk about these based on their number of layers. So that's the columns here. So simple just means one layer. So it's only a one layer thick. And we'll talk about some of the specific tissues that show up typically as one layer in the body. Stratified, therefore, are the opposite. That's many layers. So you're going to have a strata, right? A succession of multiple layers. So your skin's a good example of that, right? Because we know that skin cells can slaw off and we have a thickness there. And then, so we have stratified cells on our surface. Any of these shapes can be either simple or stratified depending on the location in the body. The last one's kind of a weird one over here. It's pseudostratified. I'm going to try to zoom it in here because they're kind of unique in the way they look. Pseudostratified, if you see the bottom of this, each cell has a bottom and each cell has a top, and they are only one cell thick. However, if you look at the nuclei, if you were just kind of stepping back and looking, this looks like 2 or 3 nuclei at the top and then these 5 or so on the bottom. Like if you were looking at just nuclei, you could maybe think they were 2 layers. So pseudostratified are kind of a weirdo in that they are not perfect column up and down. They're kind of wavy, and the disjointed placement of nuclei can sometimes make you think they are more than one layer when they're actually just one. Okay, so that's kind of a strange one, but it's a special classification of columnar epithelials. Now we're going to look at some specific epithelial types and what they look like under a microscope, and then what they do, and then their kind of common locations in the body. Now, this big table of information is already here. It's nothing that you can't just go ahead and read. But I think sometimes those are very hard to just, digest all that information at once. I think a good activity for these tissues is to draw a little person, draw a stick figure, and put each of these on there. Draw little lungs and what kind of tissue you would find there, and, kind of do it a different way to try to integrate in your mind how the structure and function of these tissues really helps you understand what they do, and their location in the body makes sense along with that. So I'll kind of talk through them, but follow along and we'll talk about what they all do, okay? So the very first one is simple squamous. So think about that. It's one layer because it's simple. It's squamous, so it's like a flat, really thin, kind of circular, eggy shaped cell. So if it's really thin and really small, then it's going to be able to absorb or secrete things, right? It's going to be, you could go right through it really fast. And so this type of cell is very important in places that have to pass exchange of materials like gases and nutrients. So think about the air sacs of your lungs, your alveoli, and your capillaries, lymphatic vessels. Those 3 things are the primary locations of simple squamous cells. In your lungs, you get down to 1 cell thick between the lung cell in the alveoli and the capillary cell in the blood vessel, and your body can exchange gases and nutrients across those capillaries because each one is just 1 cell thick, 1 squamous cell thick. So very important for diffusion and filtration of those compounds. So if you think about where this is happening and what it looks like, that kind of leads you right into the function of that type of cell. Look at cuboidal here, simple cuboidal. So it's the same thing. It's just 1 layer thick, but it's a little bigger, fatter cells, little cubes. Probably the best place to find this is in the kidneys, in the ducts and around the kidney tubules, because it still has to secrete and absorb things, but your urinary system is trying to do that at a little slower pace and a little more precise with all those electrolytes, and so it's not going to be quite as quick as gas diffusion in the lungs and capillaries, but still needs a lot of filtration. So simple cuboidal, best location, kidney tubules, ovarian tubules, things like that. Simple columnar. Simple columnar obviously are column shaped, one layer. The digestive tract is probably your best location for these. You also have some, it says here, like in your bronchi and your uterus. Absorption is their primary goal, because think about your digestive tract, your stomach. They have to absorb all those nutrients, but you need time to break those down. You also need to secrete things in the same area, so you need some cells that can secrete mucus and acid, and so they need a little more structure. They need a little more functionality there, rather than the quick absorb and secrete. So digestive tract has a little bigger type of cell in that simple columnar. Now, one of my favorites is this pseudostratified columnar. So pseudostratified, so it's weird in that it does not maintain perfect shape. It's kind of wonky. Ciliated, because it has those cilia on top. Remember that organelle? They wave around, and usually they help move things in our body. And so the best place for those is the respiratory tract. You have to have cilia to move mucus down your respiratory tract and get that dirt and gunk and stuff you breathe in, to get it down out of the breathing passages. So pseudostratified columnar, ciliated columnar are the primarily found in your respiratory tract. Okay, stratified squamous. Now, there's a couple different types of stratified squamous. You may read about keratinized versus non-keratinized. Keratinized is waterproof. Keratin is a protein that protects you from water, and then non-keratinized means it doesn't have that. So stratified squamous are ones that are protective. They're multiple layers. They're thin, but because they can be slawed off, you can rub them off and it won't hurt because you got more layers as backup underneath. So this is definitely your skin. Your epidermis is stratified squamous. It's actually the keratinized kind because your skin is mostly waterproof. The stratified squamous here, it says lines your mouth and vagina. Those are non-keratinized. They're not waterproof, but they protect against abrasion, right? You have food going in, your urogenital tract, your anal tract, right? Those all have things passing in and out. Depending on the location, and so they have to be protective, and they have to be able to withstand abrasion, where some cells can slaw off and the whole tissue is not damaged. Probably the last one, there's several here. The last one that I usually focus on is transitional. Transitional is fun because it doesn't really look like the rest. Look at these cell shapes. They are kind of big and fat at the top. They're kind of squishy down here. They're not really pretty. It just looks weird. I could picture, if I could grab that and stretch it, maybe I could pretty it up. You know, maybe I could make it stretch and like they all line up nicely again. And that's what transitional epithelial do. They stretch. This is in your bladder, in the interior lining, so that as you fill with urine, that can stretch, right, and not be damaged, and then it can relax more when you are, after you've urinated. So it lines the bladder, the other structures like urethra and ureters in that area. It allows for a distension. That's a good anatomy word for stretching. So you'll see that term a lot of times with transitional epithelium. All right, that is our overview of epithelial tissues. Thanks for watching.